Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Riki, Director of Programs and Events, and we have another great resident interview today. I'm so honored to introduce to you Dr. Lloyd Seaton and his lovely wife, Dorothy, and they just celebrated their 72nd wedding anniversary in March. The Seatons have been residents of Butterfield since 2003. That's 17 years. And they selected a cottage. It's so cute, and they love it still. Welcome, you two. Appreciate you being here so much.
Well, thank you.
Yay. So what I wanted to do is just start out with you, Lloyd. First of all, I want to highlight the fact that you're a United States veteran, thus the flag. And you are an educator as well as you, Dorothy. You both are in education, and I'm sure you have influenced and changed many lives in a positive way. You've lived in various cities over the years. But Lloyd, I want to start with you. You're a Missouri boy originally, and tell us a little bit about your adventures in California.
Well, actually, my folks were married in Exeter, California. My father had made a little money in the wheat growing after World War I with his buddy. And so then they were going to take a trip around essentially the United States. And so they started out, and it was with a man and his daughter, and they went over in the Colorado mountains, and I guess at some point, and this is all just speculation on my part, but I think they ran out of money in the Central Valley of California, and his buddy said, well, wait a minute, I've got a relative who lives in Exeter, California. Well, it so happened my mother lived in Exeter at that time. And so they went to Exeter to bum a meal or whatever. And long story short, they married about a year later.
And then you came along.
No. I have an older sister who was the firstborn. And then when she was, I guess, still an infant, actually, about a year maybe, they came back. My father came back to work in Missouri, where he had worked in Springfield for the Frisco Railroad. Second sister was born then in a place which is now referred to as Nixa, which we call Nixie. And then along came, about 2 years later, Lloyd Seaton, Jr. And I have another sister who was born about a year after I was born, and she did not survive. And so they worked in Springfield. My dad worked in Springfield till typical railroad. They laid him off, and we went back to California, and he worked in Exeter, where my grandmother had sent her sons there earlier, and so we had lots of relatives in Exeter, and I spent my first 5.5 years of elementary school there. Good place, nice place, small town, 5,000. You couldn't do anything that everyone didn't know about. So it's a great place to grow up. And then my dad went back to work. The war was in Europe, was commencing to hit the economy here. And so things were moving right along. So he went back, as typical railroad fashion, they called him back. and he went back to work for the railroad in Missouri in January of 1941. And quick math, that's about almost a year before Pearl Harbor. So anyway, we were in Springfield in 41, and I stayed in Springfield until sometime later. And then I decided I'd do my own thing. And I did a little trip to California by thumb in that was 1943, I think, maybe 44, 43. And I made several trips there, but anyway, the first trip, I went to Exeter, and my sister had followed her husband, who was in the Navy. He'd finished at Farragut and had gone to Seattle, or suburb of Seattle. And so she and a cousin, whose husband was in the Air Force, both moved back to Exeter, and both of them are working there. And so when I got a little difficulty in junior high school, and I just decided I'd go on my own, and did. And so I went to see my sister in Exeter, and I think my mother came after me about 6 or 7 weeks later and towed me back to Springfield.
As mothers will do.
Yep. So, long story short, I spent a lot of time hitchhiking during that era.
Well, I'm sure it was a lot safer then than it is now.
I didn't think about it one way or other.
Yes, when you're that young, you're bulletproof.
No, but we had some interesting experience. I remember the first time that I had been fairly independent. My father was a foreman of a loading crew in a fruit house, and so I spent a lot of time there, and I found out you could buy candy bars 3 for a dime and sell them for a nickel apiece, and did. And I had a Coke operation too, sold pop. I think Coca-Cola at that time was about, I don't know, maybe 60, 65 cents a case.
A case, wow.
And knee-high was a little cheaper than that. I think flavors were like 50 some odd cents. But I ran that till we came back to Springfield, which my folks said that's what made me independent. That's why they said I decided I could go do anything I wanted. And truth of the matter is, I believed him.
Well, Dorothy, you're a California girl yourself.
Yes, I am. Yes, I was raised in, born near Ventura, and went to a old mission church. I mean, there was an old mission there, school behind the church, and I went to elementary school for 8 years there, and then there was a private girls' school up on the hill, and I went there for high school. I was at 4 years up there.
St. Catherine's.
At St. Catherine's.
St. Catherine's. So just a side note for conversation coming later. Obviously, Dorothy was raised Catholic. I'll just say Lloyd was not. All right. Now, when you went to the school, what did you do after school? After the girls' Catholic school?
I worked. I think there was a drive-in, and I took instructions. It was a new drive-in, And so they told us what we were supposed to do and everything. So I opened it up, and I started working, and my legs just hurt.
So you were
right?
a car hop?
Yes, I was
Oh
a
my
car
gosh.
hop.
Did you have roller skates
No,
or
no,
no?
no, 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 no.
No roller
just
skates.
walked. Yes, and there was a little tray that you put on the windows, and the tips were very, very good, and then they said they paid me too, and I had more money I didn't know what to do with.
So you got tips and you were happy about that, and then you found out they were going to pay you too.
Well, they did.
That's
I couldn't
awesome.
believe it. I didn't know I had so much.
Oh my goodness.
But, and I was with a buddy exercising horses in St. Louis, and this guy said if the season ended, and he said, if you want a job, I've got a half interest in a stable in Lake Tahoe. And so I said, fine, I'll go. So I hitchhiked to Lake Tahoe from St. Louis, and after some time there, I decided it's time to go back to Springfield and school. And so I hitchhiked through San Francisco and back down the coast, old 101, and to see my sister. My sister was much more confident at that time. We were, I guess, conspirators would be a better way to describe it. But anyway, we enjoyed one another a good deal. And so when I got to Ventura, she was working in a little supermarket, and we wouldn't think of it as a supermarket today. It's it was more than a mom and pop, but much less than a supermarket. And so I stayed with my brother-in-law, and who was in a missile program. He was in the they were testing misfires at Point Magoo is what he was doing. But anyway, I stayed there, and in that same store where my sister worked, it so happened Dorothy's brother, who was my age, was a sacker there for them. And so we got running around for a while, and he became a good friend. And so when it's time to go back to school, I hitchhiked back to Springfield for school, and we didn't write or anything like that. I wrote my sister, but I didn't write Dorothy. Didn't know Dorothy much at that time, except as a brat who we had to take along if we were going someplace. And we both had a friend in San Bernardino, right out of San Bernardino, which was Rialto. And so if we wanted to go over there and see them, it was more than a day trip, so we had to take Dorothy, and she pushed a car pretty good, and so it worked out okay.
Well, was that your picnic, or was that another time?
No, the picnic comes later. The next time I hitchhiked back, I worked for a drive-in and a sit-down restaurant as a fry cook, and which means then I could burn stuff faster than some other people. But what happened is they had a picnic. This is in I guess the war had ended, officially 45. And so anyway, company was having a picnic and so I did my laundry at Dorothy's house, and so she was ironing a shirt for me, and I asked her, I said, how would you like to go to a picnic? And Dorothy's response was typical Dorothy, well, what are they going to feed us? And I said, steak. She said, fine, I'll go. And so we went to the picnic, and after the picnic, we went to Santa Barbara. And her company was pretty good, and so I said, okay, let's go to Santa Barbara and to the show. There's a nice movie house in Santa Barbara, one of those that they built with the sky up in the ceiling.
Oh, wow.
And so we went up to Santa Barbara to the show, and then after we got out of the movie, I had borrowed a friend's car, and so on the way home, the tie rod dropped off of it, and so the steering wheel was doing this, and the highway patrol was right behind me, and so I got the thing stopped. I guess he figured he was going to issue a ticket for me for being inebriated, drunk, and then I took Dorothy home a couple, 3 hours later than I should have. Her father raised Cain with me, which really bothered me. I mean,
I'm sure it did.
oh yes. So anyway, that's the way that happened. So she worked in a drive-in for a while, and I actually worked as fry cook in that drive-in for a while. So different one, but competitor.
Well, Dorothy, tell us from that point on how you two started getting better acquainted.
We didn't really. The two boys, they went fishing, they did this and they did that. And then one time I was, Lloyd's sister and husband were having a picnic and invited Lloyd and I to come. And we did. That was kind of nice. But that was about all. And then we started doing things together, both of us. And it was just more sister and brother rather than, anything else. But then things changed a little bit. And he said, I'm going to be in the Army, and I probably won't be back for a while. Would you agree to marry me? When I get back? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Well, when we were coming back in the car, we started talking about the kind of a person we might like to marry. And we realized we were sitting next to one another. So that's where that began. And anyway, so then he went in the service and went to Japan, well, eventually. And we corresponded, and I sent him some pictures, and it was a long time. It was gone a long time.
Well, tell us about that, Lloyd.
Well,
you enlisted, correct?
I enlisted in Springfield, went up to St. Louis, and they took us to the air base right out of Springfield, and that's where they had us inducted into the Army. And then I went to I went to Chicago and froze 1 week on the North Shore. And then we went from there to Fort Bragg, and I was at Bragg 5 weeks until they cut our training short. I was one of 2,800 they loaded on an ex-freight Liberty ship, I guess, and they'd converted to a troop carrier, and I think we were about 28 or 31 days getting to Incheon, Korea, and I didn't know why I was going to Korea. I had no idea. The reason it took so long is we got caught in a storm, a typhoon, and so we had to divert and pick up a merchant man who was on a merchant ship, a merchant sailor, who had an acute appendicitis, and they didn't have the facilities to take care of him. And so that took an extra few days, but it was a mean trip.
I would think so. Now, you trained as a paratrooper, correct?
Yes, the next one we went down to, actually I went to Japan, and I was supposed to have been gone to Fort Benning, Georgia, but I ended up in a place called Yonomi, Honshu, Japan, and they'd set up a training facility there. They were trying to rotate, meaning the Army heads, Army officers, were attempting to rotate all of the VA, the veterans of World War II, out of the theater, send them home. And so that's why the short training on all of us. But they had set up a training facility at Yonomi, which was an ex-Japanese air base, and we were doing exercises all over the place. And some of them, we went into areas where the Americans hadn't been there before, but it was a neat time for a kid. It didn't, and so I went to parachute training at Yonomi, Honshu, Japan. And then I became essentially I moved up through the ranks a little faster, perhaps, than I needed to, but I went home went back to base from training as a corporal shortly thereafter. Then I made buck sergeant, and then I made staff sergeant. And I was the acting first sergeant, which is another story of a parachute infantry company, when I was, I guess, about 18 or 19 years old. So.
Well, when you left Japan, you came home.
That's true.
And we're so glad you did. And we do appreciate your service, Lloyd. We honestly do. But when you returned home, you had a little conversation with your parents, I think. So tell us about that.
Well, we came home through New Orleans. So I was I took leave at, from Kentucky. I took leave then and stopped by Springfield, and then I said, I'm going to Ventura, and I'll probably bring a bride home. Anyway, I did. But I had a little problem there. My folks were Baptist, and I was a Baptist. And of course, I had to go through indoctrination before Dorothy and I could marry in the church, or before she could marry in the church.
And that's quite a lengthy program.
Oh, yes, can be. And so anyway, I was on leave for 10 days, and I was going back to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and so I said to Dorothy, well, we can get married and go back to Hopkinsville, and I can do the whatever I need to do later, or we can delay it. And so typical Dorothy, she had an answer. So that evening we drove to Las Vegas. And the next morning when they opened the courthouse, we were sitting in the parking lot in Clark County and got a license to get married, and got married at, one of those little marriage counselors front storefronts.
It wasn't the Elvis Chapel, was it?
No, Elvis wasn't around then. And
Just
so
kidding.
This was 1949. So anyway, we married. I think the witness was the lady who swept the place out, and someone else we grabbed off the street. They made a recording of the ceremony, which I have no idea where it is or what happened to it. But
Who was your best man and
it was a
bridesmaid?
guy that was in the service with me, and he was a character. I called him and I said, we're going to Vegas, I need a best man. He said, I just dropped him in L.A. And so, the day before, and I said, we're going up, do you want to go? He said, sure, I'll go. So he was the best man. So
He wasn't the best man.
No.
You were the best.
Dorothy, let me fix your earpiece real quick. It's wanting to come off there. I need to pull that up just a minute. Oops.
she's got too much stuff in there.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, so you went home, announced to your parents that you were just married in Vegas, and what happened a couple of months later?
Her mother raised hell when we got back to Ventura. So we sent telegrams to the folks that were involved and said, we're married.
Your folks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We drove to San Diego to talk to tell your brother. So
He was also in the Navy.
So you eventually did have a church wedding.
well, I went through instructions, actually more than once. But anyway, I went through and we had a wedding in December of that year in Springfield in a small church. Just the parish is just north of Drury College, if you know Springfield. And there's a little incident in there. I went to Drury College for a little while. I enrolled in Drury College, but then I found out that was pre-med, pre-theology, and I was pre-nothing. And so that's what the guy next door to us was
Well, that's awfully sweet that you went through all the instruction and did that for Dorothy. I think that's awesome.
well, that's what, yes.
Your education became quite the focal point for your life at this juncture.
No, actually, I went to work for Armour and Company for a couple of years there.
Okay. But then when did you know you wanted to be in business or go to business school?
A couple of reasons. Number one, the guy who was my general manager with Armour told me I couldn't make any money with Armour. He told me what his salary was, and he said, Lloyd, you need to go back to school. So, because obviously See, meanwhile, I had showed up for a GED test while in Japan and passed it. And I was awarded a graduation certificate from Springfield High School. And so that was my ticket to get into college into Drury originally. And the year I went to Drury, they had about 1,000 new freshmen, I think. Probably 1,000 students and 1,000 new freshmen. But anyway, the GI Bill was running full blast. And I thought I needed more, unquestionably needed more school, needed more education, so. But as I said, I dropped out because the end of the semester. A guy said, "Why are you dropping out? You're not flunking anything." And I said, "Well, my problem is that which I just stated. I'm not pre-med, pre-theology, or pre-whatever. I'm pre-nothing. Until I'm pre-something, I'm wasting a lot of time and energy." So that's when I went back to California, and I worked then for an engineering company, and they gave us lots of responsibilities. Small company, took lightweight aggregate and popped it like popcorn, and made lightweight aggregate, which now resides in all kinds of high rises in LA. And I knew I needed to go back to school, so I got recalled on the Korean thing, and I went to Korea then. Well, I'd been to Korea, as I told you, on the ship, but I got recalled on the Korean thing. I got up at Camp Roberts. I was bird dogging troops, and scared to death I would go to Korea with them because they were the most undisciplined group I'd ever seen. So anyway, when I finished, when they discharged me, I went to work for Armour and Company. My sister's involved in that again, because we drove from North Carolina when I guess it's North Carolina. North Carolina when we got out, and we stopped by Lexington, Missouri. And my brother-in-law had been discharged. When he was discharged, he went to work for Armour and Company. And he was a salesman for Armour. And so he was telling me about the good life with Armour. And so I went to work for Armour. And I worked for them for 2 years.
And then where did you wind up going to school?
Then when we went, Armour had transferred me to the West Coast, and I went to, our child was born in Ventura. Dorothy had to go home to her mother.
When I was pregnant.
Yep. And so, anyway, the guy that I was working for in Ventura immersed us in a lot of stuff that I knew I didn't have skills that were needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I did the production schedule for the furring tiles for Soledad Prison. And I had learned to read blueprints the night before, almost. But it worked, because when I got back, the guy looked at my stuff and he said, "Yeah, that's about what I figured." The guy who had sent me had already figured it out.
Wow.
And so, anyway, when I joined a little Army Reserve unit there, and I got recalled from that. And when I got out, I knew I needed to go back to school, but so with Armor and Armor telling me that I need to go back to school as well, I thought maybe someone was right.
Did you go to school in Ventura?
No, I went to school in Bakersfield. Went to school in Bakersfield College for 2 years, and then I went to San Jose State for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And picked up a master's degree at San Jose. Went over from there, I guess we moved to Victorville. Dorothy, meanwhile, is working for a brokerage house there in Ventura, while I was working for the aggregate firm or the engineering firm. She was working for the brokerage house, and so when I got recalled, I said we ended up going back to school any place where they had a brokerage office that had a job. So anyway, I was a Cal vet. I was had a WW2 veterans classification, and then I had also the Korean War. So I had more, if you choose, subsidized education than I could use. And so anyway, went to school at Bakersfield College, and I met some people there and instructors there who I think changed my attitude about school.
Mm-hmm.
One was a wrestler from Cal who taught English, who was an interesting guy. And then the usual tough guys that, so I made up a lot of, I think I took 15 hours of English and about 15 hours of math.
Dorothy, were you already teaching at this point?
No, I was working in the brokerage firm while he was going to school.
Ah, okay.
And then I guess when I finished, San Jose had a job for her, and so we went to San Jose. I didn't want to live in LA, and UCLA was my other choice, and so I really did not. I had turned down Armor, and Armor had sent us to Bakersfield because I'd turned them down. I didn't want to work in LA.
I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to work in LA either.
Well, it just was too alien in terms of the number of the hassle of getting to work, the hassle of getting back.
Right.
And the people that you're dealing with were interesting, but you didn't want to deal with all of them. But anyway, when we went to San Jose, it sort of changed things around a little.
At that point, well, go ahead.
Bakersfield changed my attitude about school, and I said, I think I want to teach.
Oh.
And so I figured I'd teach in a junior college. That was probably the best I could shoot for. So when I went to San Jose State, when I did the master's there, I didn't do it in ed, I did it in business. And I taught half-time or part-time for them, which was half-time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went down to a little place called Victorville, California. When I graduated, the dean at San Jose offered me $4,700, and we could make $5,700 or $5,800 at Victorville, California. And so we went to Victorville. And I had said, Dorothy and I had decided at that time we'd go down there for a couple of years, and then we would see about getting a doctorate someplace. I had an opportunity to go to getting a doctorate, but I didn't want it in that particular discipline. I wanted it in business or in economics, either one. And so I circulated for that kind of education and the folks at Arkansas answered every letter I wrote.
Oh, really?
In Victorville, he taught at a small junior college,
In San Bernardino Valley.
San Bernardino Valley College. And that was where I got my first 21 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. None from me. She she never took a formal course from me. Anyway, she knew better. For that matter, and I guess when I was there, we circulated about, I think, several schools, and I had an offer from a man named Westmeyer who retired from here. They called him Choo-Choo Westmeyer, W.E. Westmeyer. He went down he lived in Conway after he retired. But he answered every letter, every question I ever asked him. And my choices were, I could continue part-time. Victorville would give me the time to drive into L.A. and take a couple of courses at USC and University of Southern California. But I really was tired of part-time school. And I had worked all the way through Bakersfield College and San Jose State. I had worked. I was a night clerk at the hotel and went to school the next day after my 8-hour shift at the hotel in Bakersfield. And when we were at San Jose, I worked for Southern Pacific Railroad as a switchman because it coincided with the spud season and what have you. And so it worked out rather well. I think Dorothy didn't know what I was doing.
So you basically were inquiring about finishing school at the University of Arkansas?
Yeah.
And so when did you just decide that's what you wanted to do? And
Well, we'd already decided we were going to get a doctorate, but we did not know where. That's the point. I'd been encouraged to go up Stanford to get an Ed.D. And that was fine. I mean, except that was the discipline I was going to work in. And so I did not want to do that. And we had we had entry in other places. But the thing came down to the fact that, well, truth is my folks were 120 miles away. We had a kid, should know something about his grandparents. And they had housing. And as I say, they answered every question I asked. One other good school, Southern School with a good program, long-standing program, sent me a letter with the offer of assistantship without ever interviewing me.
What a blessing.
And, well, we, my attitude about that was this guy Westmeyer had answered every question. I knew it was a young program, and so it was a program that I thought I could fit in. Incidentally, a couple of guys died that were involved in that decision.
Who were they?
Well, in both economics and accounting, so.
Okay. Well, Dorothy shared with me earlier that when you relocated from California, you moved into Carlson Terrace.
That's
A lot of residents will recognize that name.
in August.
Oh, oh my goodness. Extremely hot. And you, Dorothy, at this point, did you have to get a map out to figure out where Arkansas was?
No,
No, okay.
No, not really. That he was, when he started working on his PhD, he was also teaching, and so he really couldn't have two jobs, kind of thing. So then I became the area manager for Carlson Terrace, and while I was going to school, and
For 1 year.
I don't know what year. What year was that?
60-something, 70-something?
Yeah, you mean what year? No, it was 1 year that
Oh, 1 year. Oh, okay.
that she did all of it. There was a housing office, and they did all the paperwork, and what we did was showed the apartments, and as a place for them to send in, I guess, what we'd call work orders here, or any problem came, and we had keys to all of
The apartments.
Oh, okay. So you were the go-to
yeah.
tenant person to take care of the tenants.
Yep.
Dorothy, you were going to school, finishing in elementary education, correct?
Right.
And you got your master's,
I got my bachelor's.
bachelor's?
Right,
Okay.
and
Then we left,
then we left.
went to New Mexico. She
Okay.
taught her first, I guess, paid tenure track job would have been in Albuquerque. And then we came back to Fayetteville for 1 year while I tied up the PhD. And at that time, she entered their master's program and pretty much tied it up. And so we both graduated the same time with a PhD, and she got a MA.
And that was Master Mommy and Dr. Daddy.
Yep.
I love that.
But and then we went to Nebraska, and neither one of us had never lived in ice and snow much, and so we knew that was a mistake. Our son was was a junior in high school, and so we said, well, we'll stay until he graduates. And meanwhile, that second year guy from Virginia that I had met called and said, we've got a new school in Bakersfield, and we understand you've had some experience in Bakersfield. So I had, and it was snowing hard, and I said, you picked the right day to call. So.
In Nebraska, Mother had sent me a dozen roses for my birthday, and I took them to school to put by the entryway there. At the end of the school day, I came to pick up my roses, and they were black.
Oh, my goodness.
They had frozen in my car on the way to school.
Oh, my goodness.
And I did not know that. And I did not know that they were sitting there black.
Well,
So you wound up going back to Bakersfield, correct?
we went back to Bakersfield for 1 year. And I was on a flight to Dallas for a presentation of some sort. And I told Dorothy, well, they've offered me the deanship here.
At the University of Arkansas?
No,
No.
No, oh, I'm sorry.
at
Yes.
Bakersfield,
Okay.
Cal State Bakersfield. And I said, you've never slept with a dean that I'm aware of. But anyway, I thought I might take it. And the presumption was I would take it. And then I knew something about the red tape that's involved in the state college system. And I also remember I was at San Jose, and so I had been involved with part of that red tape. And so I decided, Modisette called.
Jim Modisette.
Yep. And said, he knew we were looking for staff. He said, do you have anyone I ought to contact? And I gave him a couple, 3 numbers, names, that people might fit, might do the work for them. And at the end of that conversation, I said, I'm going to throw in one more name. Me. And that hadn't been, I had asked, they'd asked me once before whether I'd stay at the end of my doctorate, I guess. And I had said, no, people will think I'm a student still, and I won't act like a student. And so that will create problems.
Understandable.
And so that's when we went to Nebraska instead. But anyway, we moved to Fayetteville and moved to 1701 West Center, lived there for 30 years. Dorothy botched the bargaining end of it because as we rounded the corner, she said, we'll take it.
That's the house I want.
Well, when you finally decided to make Arkansas your home in Fayetteville, you wanted to get a job in elementary education. Tell us about your interview at Washington Elementary School in Fayetteville.
Well, we were coming to Fayetteville, and I went to Washington School, and I went upstairs to where Virginia was, and I said,
Virginia Wilson.
Virginia Wilson, I'm interested in teaching for you, but I'm not familiar with the books you use or anything like that. Do you mind if I look at some of the books that you used? And she said sure, and she got them out, and I said, oh, these are really good. These are really good. You have the math books too? And she said, yeah. And so I said, well, right now I'm more interested in reading. And so she got the reading books out. And I said, oh, these are good. Do you mind if I borrow these so I can look at them? I'll get them back to you, of course. And I said, these are really good books. And then she said, that would be all right. That would be all right. You can borrow those books. And I said, boy, I sure would like to teach out these books. They're sure are good. Anyway, so then I left. And I was going to my car, and I heard this window go up. Dorothy, you got the job.
She let you get all the way to the car before she offers you the job.
Well, no, just downstairs. And I said, oh, wonderful.
anyone in education in Fayetteville knew Virginia Wilson.
Yeah.
She was an icon in the education
Oh,
system.
gosh, yes.
And she was also one of the first residents that moved to Butterfield.
She and her sister Dakota owned part of the property that Butterfield Trail
Yes,
rests on,
the corner
the
of,
vineyard.
yes.
Yeah.
So, well, we're glad that Virginia offered you the job and that you accepted. I'm sure
She
many
would-
people have had their children taught
She would
there.
never have her picture taken when she was principal.
Oh,
And I painted a picture of her, and it was pretty good. But then she came to Butterfield, and she was, selling Butterfield. And there's her picture in the paper.
I remember that.
And I'm going, where is this?
Oh, hold on. Let me do it. It's turned around.
Oh,
She and Martha Brewer, who is still a resident of Butterfield, moved in at the same time together.
yeah.
And
Well, I had the Brewer
lived here
kids
many years.
in the first grade.
Okay.
And so I knew Martha Brewer very well.
Well, we're going to wrap it up for just a little bit, but I really want to highlight some things that Lloyd and Dorothy have both done as volunteers of Butterfield Trail Village. I'm sure you've volunteered and did many things in the greater community, but I've been here the entire time the Seatons have been here, and Lloyd has served on the resident finance committee. He was key in the board representative
On the board.
on the finance committee.
Yes.
And he was key in our recycling program that's pretty much on hold right now, but that was a big undertaking. Lloyd is an avid gardener, and he also helped relocate the gardens once the assisted living unit and the parking lot were going to be built, and helped relocate it to where it is now, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Dorothy, you have served on the healthcare volunteer committee. You did for years and years and years.
Yes.
And of course, many of us recognize Dorothy today because of her hilarious parts in the Butterfield Play Readers. And I'll say and give a plug for the next play coming up in June that Dorothy will be starring in that as well. And it is Hospital Days, The Aftershock, which is a sequel to the first one a couple of months ago.
Michael's done a wonderful job with this one.
Martha wrote the first one, Michael wrote the second one, and they have put together something really fun. And I hope you all tune in for that. It'll be on your June calendar the last Thursday of the month. I don't remember the date. But you both have done so much for Butterfield. Is there anything else you want to share with us about why did you choose Butterfield?
Well, besides the obvious, we had a lot of friends that moved out here, and it was a nice place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.